Hi everyone, this is Mandy Coker with O3 Solutions, and we wanted to take a little bit of time today to address some of the questions that we received during the AWP 2020 virtual conference. You may recognize the guy up on your screen there. He was quite busy last week in a lot of different sessions, whether it was plenary or breakout sessions. And at sometimes we didn't get to all of the questions. And if you know Josh well, you know that he really wants to provide as much information as possible and give you the resources so that you can make a good decision when it comes to your AWP program. So Josh is the CEO at O3 Solutions, and you may have seen him as part of the CII Performance and Benchmarking Co-Chair. That's part of the AWP Community for Business Advancement. He also is part of the technology committee for CII, and in his previous experience includes being an SVP of product and market strategies for a materials management company. He holds 12 technology patents and also has a BSc in mechanical engineering. So I'll turn it over to him and let him give you a quick overview of O3, and then we'll dive into those questions.
Great, thanks, Mandy. So as Mandy mentioned, we participated in 4 sessions during the AWP conference, and there were too many questions for us to get to. So we're using this as an opportunity to address some of those. And hopefully, if your question wasn't answered in the live session, you'll hear an answer today. So we're going to go through a real quick O3 overview, jump into those questions and answers, and then we'll provide some information on how you can get additional information or ask additional questions if you still have those after today's session. So who is O3? O3 is a modern SaaS platform that's built specifically around advanced work packaging and agile best practices. And we're focused entirely on the industrial construction space. So things to keep in mind there, it's modern, it's SaaS, it's a platform across the entire life cycle and purpose-built for industrial construction, agile, and advanced work packaging. In terms of a solution set, it is a platform that goes across the entire life cycle of the project from concept through commissioning, starting with our on-plan functionality for early planning, front-end planning, and preparation for setting up the project for AWP success, on design for the detailed engineering phase where your engineering and procurement packages are developed and you add value directly to the engineering and procurement organizations, on build, which is where you do your work phase planning for your construction, installation, and execution, and then on start for your commissioning and startup functionality. So it's important to keep in mind that O3 is a platform designed for industrial construction projects and across their entire life cycle. And then from a client experience perspective, O3 is roughly 50-50 split between owners and EPCs. We also work on very large projects, so some of the largest $40 or $50 billion TIC projects in the world, as well as small projects as small as 50,000 in TIC, managed as portfolios at existing operating facilities. So O3 has experience on the world's largest projects with thousands of users, as well as scaling AWP down to handle a program of 50 or more projects operating at a small cap facility and everything in between. So with that brief intro, we're going to jump in and I'm going to hand it back to Mandy so we can go through some of the questions that we received either most often or that we didn't get a chance to answer in the 4 sessions in which O3 participated last week during the AWP conference.
All right, thanks, Josh. So first, we're going to talk about some of the questions we received during our O3 breakout session. So in that session, we shared 6 case studies that were AWP implementations using different pieces and parts and solutions of O3. And one of the questions that we got was around O3's SaaS capabilities. So this question, there are many SaaS tools on the market that are not great for collaboration. What makes O3 collaborative? So Josh, if you could answer that, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I probably glossed over this in our presentation where I was describing O3 as this modern collaborative platform. And I describe also that we're a SaaS or modern SaaS tool. And while being a SaaS tool helps you to be collaborative because it allows you to have other people access the tool, as this person points out, that doesn't guarantee that it's a collaborative tool. So when I talk about the collaboration inside of O3, there's a couple of key things. First, O3 is an action-oriented tool. So one of the key mantras of Agile project management is make all work visible. And the idea behind that is that if you can see all activities and you can understand all work and you have that transparency, then you can get some efficiency and collaboration out of that. And O3 supports that approach of that visibility and collaboration, because all of the actions inside of O3, regardless of their type, it could be constraints or approvals, risks, issues, decisions, tasks, it really doesn't matter. All of those are trackable actions inside of the tool, and they're all visible inside of the application. And in fact, in order to manage those and make that work manageable, you can take those actions and group them into team boards to be managed via Kanban or card view approach, and assign them to specific teams for execution, as well as individuals with due dates. And you have the tracking and forecasting and visibility and reporting onto whether or not those actions are being executed. So O3 as an action-oriented tool, it replaces all those spreadsheets and other action tracking items or tools that you use on a project. It is the core action management system on projects. And that really facilitates that collaboration. And then lastly, from O3's commercial models designed to drive collaboration as well, because O3 uses a unlimited users project licensing model or program licensing model. And so those unlimited users include vendors or suppliers or contractors or subcontractors or the owner, the EPC, really doesn't matter. You're able to get all those people into one place and collaborating on those actions and tasks together.
Great. So further on in the O3 presentation, you talked about constraint management, and specifically around how O3 really got its start several years ago in the constraint management field. This particular question was around that. So why do you describe your approach to constraint management as a new or different approach when constraint management has been around for decades?
Yeah, that's another great question. So it is absolutely true that all projects have constraints, and all projects have been finding some way to manage them for many years, for decades. So that's definitely the case. All projects have constraints. All those constraints have to be managed in order to be able to build those projects. I think the difference is in the way that you manage those constraints. Most projects that we run into that aren't using O3 are using Excel sheets to try to keep up with all those constraints and who owns them and when they're due and any progress that's made against them. And that's a real challenge, because when you're trying to manage those constraints across lots of different contractors or lots of different stakeholders using Excel, that can fall apart really quickly. Then there's these other tools that provide constraint identification, which is essentially a checklist. So I know for this installation work package, I need materials, I need to have access to the workface, I need to have my drawings, I need to have my permits. And in that instance, you can go through and check a box to say, yep, I've completed my checklist, so I can issue this package. But that's not managing constraints, that's identifying those constraints and whether or not those constraints have been completed. O3 takes that much further into the actual management of constraints, where every single constraint itself is an entity inside the application. It can be assigned to someone, given its own due date, a forecast date. It has reporting and analytics, alerts, notifications, tracking, statuses, workflows. So there's a real purpose-built functionality around proactively managing those constraints, so you clear them all out before you release those packages for execution. And that constraint management inside O3 is not limited just to installation work packages. That applies across all the work packages inside of the tool. O3 supports 10 work packages out of the box, and then also against other major entities inside the application, like mechanical equipment or documents or deliverables. Those all can have constraints against them as well. So the constraint management engine inside O3 is a very robust generic engine that is then applied across all those different entities inside the application. And that's why O3 has really revolutionized the way that constraints are managed on construction projects.
All right, so I am definitely along with this question because I learned something new during your presentation about institutional inertia. So you talked a little bit about the differences and the challenges between mega projects and operating assets. So this particular question is, why is change management more difficult at the operating asset level and not at large mega projects that require sometimes more complex implementations of process and technology?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to distinguish between the organization's willingness to change and the amount of change that's sort of necessary to put in place. And those are kind of two factors on change management. So when you look at operating facilities, a lot of times their processes are less sophisticated than greenfield new build projects. And so there's often a larger move that you have to make to get from their existing processes and technology to the kind of leading edge process and technology. So there's kind of a bigger movement that you have to make. And then the other issue at play is the organization's willingness to accept or ability to accept change. And that's a function of many different things. A lot of that is culture and personality. And I'm not suggesting that the culture or personality is less willing to accept change at operating assets. But what we have found is that there is more of an ingrained way of executing. There is more of that institutional inertia, to use that term that I used during the presentation. And what that really means is that the organization has been doing something the same way with the same people for an extended period of time, sometimes for decades. And so the path that they're going down is well worn. So it's been done the same way. And so getting out of that groove or that well-worn path to take a path less traveled is more of a shift than when you look at a greenfield project where you're bringing together a team, you're putting together a plan for how to execute that. And that plan and that process is unique to that project. Now, obviously, the different stakeholders, they have their own institutional processes and enterprise approaches to things, but that team that's coming together for that project is going to execute for that project. And then it won't be exactly the same people or the same process, on the next project. So there is less of that kind of ingrained, we've been doing it this way forever, that you run into at the operating assets. The one thing I will note is, and I mentioned this in the presentation, is that because of operating assets have this continuous flow and funnel of new projects, you can take that change gap and break it down into smaller pieces. So you can bite off a little bit of change on one project, and then bite off a little bit of more change on the next project, then bite off a little more change on the next project. Whereas with these mega projects, you kind of have to set it up the way you're going to do it at the beginning and pretty much stick to that during the life of the project. So there are some advantages to small cap environments and the way you can break down the change into smaller pieces, but we do find that the change management is more challenging.
All right, for our next question, you really spent a lot of time in the presentation going over some new concepts that O3 is introducing to the market. Pretty exciting stuff. But I think this question is a good one to address. So do you expect companies to adopt these new AWP concepts for engineering and procurement when they have not yet been blessed by CII?
That's totally fair question. The short answer is absolutely. And I think it's important to keep in mind, CII didn't bless AWP as a best practice until 2015, but there were definitely people doing AWP before that point, right? I mean, AWP, it wasn't that, CII invented AWP in 2015 and made it a best practice. The reality is that, there's always going to be a group of thought leaders and early adopters that are working together to advance the state of the industry. And we don't expect CII to be the body that's going to push the limits and invent the new ways of doing things. Organizations are going to do that. The free market's going to do that. There's going to be a free competition that's going to drive that. CII's role is more of the standards organization, the academic organization to gather the information, the data, perform some academic analysis, add some rigor to this process, and make it something where you're taking what's being pushed by some of the thought leaders and visionaries and early adopters, and then making that easily adoptable by the industry. So, I think the short answer is yes, we've already partnered with a number of forward-looking EP organizations that understand the value in moving the industry forward and solving the problems that are holding them back today. And I fully expect that, the work that we're doing with these organizations will ultimately, result in changes to the way that CII looks at the definition of AWP for engineering and procurement. And it may not look exactly the way that we're doing it now, but, we've got people that aren't willing to wait for the, for the solution to be fully, built out and vetted by CII. They want to solve the problems. They want to improve their delivery for their clients. They want to be best of breed today. And we share that vision, and we believe that there's a lot of people out there that think that way as well.
Right, for this question, we're going to circle back a little bit to the operating assets and small cap projects that we were just talking about. Did you use the COAA scalability model when deploying AWP on those small cap projects that you shared in your case studies?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So the short answer to that is no, we did not use the COAA scalability model when we deployed small cap projects. And the reason was that because we deployed before the COAA scalability model existed. So this is something that we were deploying AWP for brownfield projects, more than a year before the COAA model was published. So it wasn't an option when we started. But that said, we did use a process for evaluating which projects should use which portions of the AWP best practices. And we recommend that people do follow a process when they're evaluating their projects and have some rules in place. Projects of this size or projects of this type or projects in this business unit, there should be some rules for evaluating, especially when you're talking about selecting your initial pilots. But our experience after doing this with multiple owners on multiple facilities with hundreds of projects has taught us that really deploying AWP on small cap projects, it doesn't need to be thought of as a totally different approach than greenfield projects. The methodologies like COAA scalability model can be helpful as a means of organizing your thoughts and thinking about your portfolio in categories. But the most important thing is just to jump in and get going, because the nuances between the projects are better resolved at the local facility. And a kind of one size fits all industry methodology is not going to be the solution that really addresses the way that you need to think about small cap AWP at your facilities. We do think you should have a thought process. We do think you should organize your projects and think about which ones be the best fit. The most important thing is to just get going. And when you're doing that, you really want to think about the people and the culture. You want to select the project management team that's going to help your initial pilots be a success. The scope of the project is way less important than the team that you're using for those initial deployments. You want to have a team that's going to help you drive that change and help you get through some of the inevitable hurdles that you're going to have through that change management process.
All right, and this rounds out the questions for the O3 breakout presentation. What is the biggest difference between the AWP implementations on small cap projects and mega projects?
And this sort of dovetails into that last question. I think the biggest difference is small cap projects can be a little more flexible and apply more common sense to their approach. Where large cap projects benefit more from consistency and repeatability. In order to manage this massive project, you need to have the units, acting in the very same and consistent and repeatable way. On small cap projects, you can think of it as in the Army, if you have a really big deployment of a 1 million person organization, you need to have a lot of discipline and a lot of structure to be able to move and execute. On the smaller cap projects, it's maybe a little bit more of a smaller team. It's maybe more comparable to a special ops situation, and you can be a little bit more flexible and use a little bit more common sense in your approach. You don't have to be quite so rigid. And one example for that would be around IWPs. They can be in a small cap project, maybe you make them multidisciplined because you have a small multidiscipline team. So while the best practice says they should be a single discipline, in this case, hey, maybe it makes sense for them to be multidisciplined. And in terms of duration, maybe that duration should be longer or shorter to align with how you execute the work. Maybe you have some tie-ins that are much smaller in duration, and you want to scope those as an individual IWP. And maybe you have a straight run of really long straight run of pipe, and it makes sense for that to be a longer duration IWP. So I think the takeaway is that when you're looking at small cap, the best practices are the same, but you can apply maybe a little bit more common sense and be a little bit more flexible to not introduce too much overhead that removes some of the benefit of using AWP.
All right, so we're going to transition in. So O3 was honored to ask to be invited to be part of the Shell breakout presentation where they shared some of their own case studies. And one of the topics that they covered was small cap projects. So I think that's a great kind of tie-in to our previous questions. We also had a lot of great questions come in and didn't get a chance to respond to every one of those. So this is just a sampling of some of those. For this first one, how do we make technology more affordable for small cap projects?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's been cost prohibitive. It's been a real issue. One of the things that I think has prevented the proliferation of AWP on small cap projects. I think the biggest thing is you want to amortize that cost across a portfolio program of projects, right? The answer is to use a modern Saas application where you can take that cost to set up and train and the licensing and spread that across a large project set. So if you're trying to do a $100,000 TIC project, you can't deploy a technology that takes you 12 months to set up and costs you $1 million in configuration. You can't get there from an ROI perspective. But if you can deploy a modern technology that reduces the cost, doesn't require on-site resources for configuration, and then that can host multiple projects. You've got 50 projects amortizing the cost of that technology. That makes it commercially viable. So, and O3's commercial model supports that. With brownfield projects, the cost of the software is based on the total installed cost of the program. So when you have an individual brownfield project that maybe is a $30 million project, if you throw in another 5 or 6 projects that are very small, it may not even increase the licensing cost of the software depending on kind of the size of those projects. So if you're able to get multiple projects in and amortize those costs across multiple projects by using a modern SaaS approach, that can significantly reduce the per project cost of the technology and make it viable for small cap projects.
All right, so you mentioned during the Shell presentation about a productivity measurement tool, and you mentioned that some things had to be adjusted between different types of projects. So this question came in, what are some examples of things that had to be adjusted in the productivity measurement application between maintenance, small cap, and mega projects?
Yeah, I think this is similar to the AWP answer, which is there's some common sense adjustments. So, one thing that we learned that productivity measurements in maintenance projects, they're not limited to a single IWP or even to a single discipline. The observations are more area-based and can be multidiscipline. So, we had to make some adjustments to the software to facilitate that, some configuration to allow that. And that's just something that we learned through that experience of working with those different types of projects. Again, mega projects, they want to be very repeatable and consistent in their approach, whereas maintenance and smaller efforts, they tend to be able to take more liberties in their approach to ensure maximum efficiency. So just being able to do things like multidiscipline readings and readings for an area as opposed to assigned to a crew or an IWP. So it's more of just a common sense approach to how the work is actually executed in a maintenance environment and making sure that the productivity aligns with that execution approach.
All right, and the main topic for the Shell presentation was all about how they pivoted as an organization to continue down their AWP journey. And this question was, how has COVID impacted the owner's view of digitalization?
Yeah, well, I think every owner that we've ever spoken to has some form of a digitalization initiative within their organization. And while I think intuitively everyone understands that digitalization is the future and it's necessary and it drives efficiencies, a lot of people didn't really understand that or feel the pain of an analog, a non-digital environment until COVID happened. And when COVID happened, when people were first forced to work remotely or work from home or have fewer people to try to be as productive, that's when the cracks or the failures in the analog approach really started to show. So I think a lot of people, one of the things that I think we're going to see as a positive coming out of the COVID situation is that I think a lot of organizations are accelerating their digitalization effort. And I think that's going to help our industry in particular. And, COVID just made that obvious, the value of being able to support remote digital collaboration. It just brought that to the forefront of many organizations' minds. So I think digitalization was something people intuitively understood was important. It wasn't until they felt the pain of a COVID situation with trying to support analog paper-based processes in a work from home environment that people realized this isn't just something that is a nice to have. This is a must have.
And along the same topic, we had another question. How have leadership expectations for AWP programs changed as a result of COVID?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here is whenever there's any kind of cost pressure happening from macroeconomic conditions or the uncertainty, resulting from that uncertainty, you have this cost pressure on initiatives and spending in general. I think everyone across the world has felt that. Maybe not Amazon or a few others that are kind of really having explosive growth as a result of COVID. But a lot of companies have seen some focus on the bottom line coming in as a result of the COVID and the associated economic situation. And I think that resulted in a shift for people to focus on immediate value. So I think I'm seeing a trend to move away from kind of less of a focus on large, big corporate efforts that have a multi-year horizon that won't be able to justify their investment for years, and moving more towards how can we show value now? How can we recoup investment and show an ROI in a much more compressed time frame by executing AWP on real projects? So I think I see people spending less time talking about long-term future big kind of initiatives and more brass tacks. How do we make money? How do we solve problems? How do we save right now? And I think that's more of a shift towards an immediate value and more practical application of AWP, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, thanks for that. We're going to shift gears. So on the last day of the conference, you were part of a panel. The topic of the panel was, so you've conquered your data challenges, now what? And that really just put the audience into the mindset of, yeah, we're still kind of getting through these data challenges and understanding standardization of data, et cetera. But what could the future look like if we started working on some of these other challenges now? So this particular question that we didn't get a chance to answer was, while data standardization will help the industry get on the same page with cross-project reporting, why have we not seen this happen on a smaller scale, even within a single organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's an astute observation and a good question. So, we have seen efforts to consolidate the data for reporting purposes within organizations, but as any data scientist will tell you, the analysis of the data is not the hard part. The difficult part is getting the data cleaned up and structured in a way that enables meaningful analysis. So if anyone tells you, hey, we've got this, we got this great charting system and we can see all this stuff, and that's not the hard part, right? That's been largely commoditized. The hard part is, can I get this data in a structure, in a clean way that I can analyze it and reach meaningful insights? And we've struggled to get consistent data sets, even within a single organization's owners use different contractors on different projects who bring different processes, definitions, and tools to the projects. And so the owners have, they get different data from every single project. EPC side, the approaches vary across projects and across teams within the same organization. So even within individual organizations, there's a lack of consistency on the data side. So addressing this at the industry level is hopefully going to help us to solve it at the organizational level as well. But we have really, it comes back to that Project Snowflake approach that Jay Moser talked about in this panel session. And really the challenge of looking at every project as being unique and being a snowflake and accepting different data sets, even within an organization, has made it a challenge to get the data structured and cleaned in a way that you can have these kind of meaningful insights and drive that continuous improvement. So, I think that's why we haven't even seen it in a real meaningful way within a single organization.
This next question, kind of similar, but definitely a different topic for sure. So how will this cross-organization data comparison work when many of the companies are reluctant to share this kind of data?
Yeah, so we talked about an effort to get to a benchmarking. One of the things CII is working on, this concept of a benchmarking, industry benchmark, to understand where you are in terms of your AWP maturity or the returns that you're seeing from AWP. And this person raises a very valid point, which is that a lot of organizations are reluctant to share this information, and that is always a challenge. But there is precedence for making this work. Organizations like IPA have built a real business out of providing these services. CII has got a performance and benchmarking committee. The CI AWP CBA has a performance and benchmarking committee. I co-chair that, but there's also a larger performance and benchmarking initiative that's out of UT Austin and CII, and leveraging supercomputers there to kind of help drive this. So there are initiatives happening to collect this data, but I think at the end, it's gonna have to provide some anonymity for people to contribute. And then there's going to have to be some incentive for people to contribute, either giving them more access to insights and additional value if you contribute data, or the more data you contribute, the more value you get somehow, or it's kind of a paid service like IPA does. There's got to be some, value exchange around that data to make it happen, because on a purely volunteer basis, I agree with this person asking this question. I assume they believe that, that's going to be a real challenge. But I think the free market will solve this problem. I think there will be an incentive to make this work. I think it's valuable. And so an organization like IPA, or, maybe CII or others will figure out a way to make this work to the point where people want to contribute their data, because of the value they get back is worth more to them than keeping that data secret and kind of behind their firewall.
Thanks, Josh. And I really appreciate you joining us today and giving us those additional answers. I hope you were able to be part of the presentations. Those are still available on the event platform. You can watch them on demand, and hopefully watch this session as a follow-on as additional question and answer session. So I want to invite everyone to learn more about O3 and the work that we're doing, whether it's with our clients or with CII. You can visit us at our website, www.o3.solutions. And please note there is no .com, so that is correct, www.o3.solutions. And there you can find some of our case studies, the ones even that Josh shared, some of our latest webinars, more information about our solution suite, and then help you stay up to date on what we're up to. So you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter and connect with us on social media. So if you still have questions, please reach out to us. We're always here. You can reach us either through our Contact Us button on our website, or by emailing us at info@o3.solutions. So we're always here. We can direct those questions directly to our CEO, Josh Girvin, or if you have more in the weeds types questions that our project managers or our client success team could answer for you, specifics about the technology, any of that, just reach out to us and let us know. We really appreciate your time today, and hope you found these additional answers engaging and educational. Hope you have a safe and productive day.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, Josh.